The smoke hung heavy in the air, thick and black, climbing up from the judge's estate. Nessa stood at the edge of the barn, arms crossed, watching it burn. Her mind was somewhere far away, a place where nothing but flames had ever made sense. She'd seen this before, years ago. The fire took it all, people, places, things. Nessa never ran, she never moved, she watched it all, and this time she wouldn't turn away. The flicker of the fire reflected in her eyes, but the burn in her gut was something else, something older, something more familiar. She wasn't afraid of what burned, she was afraid of what came after. A shadow crossed the barn door. Clara, the judge's daughter. She stepped into the light, her face a mask of something fierce, but there was a crack in it. Nessa didn't need to ask. Clara had been running from something her whole life. Today she had nowhere to run but here. Clara stopped at the threshold, eyes fixed on the fire. It looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. "I'm not going back," Clara said, her voice rough, like it had been holding something back for a long time. Nessa didn't reply. She just looked at the fire, the heat radiating off it, chasing the cold from her skin. She hadn't seen Clara in years. The last time was when they were both children, before things got messy. Before the judge's house became a prison for both of them. "I'm not asking you to save me," Clara continued, her voice trembling. "I'm asking if you'll let me stay." The words hung in the barn, thick with unspoken things. Nessa stepped forward, her boots heavy on the dirt. The fire was nothing compared to this. Clara standing there was something worse. It was a challenge she hadn't asked for. "You're a fool if you think you can hide from him," Nessa said, turning her gaze back to the fire. "But I don't care." Clara flinched but didn't move. "What are you going to do, Nessa? Let me stay here? You won't stop him, you know." Clara's words cut through the air like a blade, but there was fear in them. Real fear. The kind that burned in the pit of your stomach. Nessa gave a short, bitter laugh. "Stop him? That man can't even stop himself from making enemies. You think I'm the one you need to worry about?" Clara took a step forward. "You're not going to let me go, are you?" Nessa didn't answer. She let the silence stretch between them. The barn smelled of hay, dust, and the smoke from the fire outside. It felt like the world was closing in, like everything they both tried to escape had finally caught up. "What happens if I stay?" Clara asked, her voice softer now. "Then you'll burn just like the rest of them," Nessa replied, the words falling like stones. "But at least you'll be free for a minute." Clara shook her head, her hands tightening into fists. "I don't want freedom. I want a chance." "A chance at what?" Nessa's tone was sharp, but there was a flicker of something softer beneath it. "A chance to stop running," Clara said, meeting Nessa's eyes. For a moment, the anger, the fear, all of it was gone, and what was left was something Nessa hadn't seen in a long time, someone willing to face what was coming. Nessa didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. She turned away, her eyes scanning the barn, the shadows cast by the flames flickering through the cracks in the walls. Clara stepped closer, her presence steady now, like she wasn't about to run again. "I don't belong there anymore," Clara said. "I don't belong anywhere." Nessa stayed quiet, the fire crackling outside. She could feel the weight of Clara's words pressing on her chest, but she didn't move, didn't speak. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Nessa exhaled. "You can stay for tonight." Clara's eyes softened, just a little. "That's all I need." The two women stood in the dim light of the barn, the fire burning in the distance, casting long, twisted shadows over their faces. Neither of them spoke, neither of them moved. For the first time, they were both trapped in the same place, together, but neither of them were sure what came next. As the fire raged on, neither of them looked back. The air in the barn was thick with dust, the silence pressing against Nessa's chest. Clara's presence was like a weight she hadn't asked for, but couldn't shake. She sat across from Nessa, her back stiff, eyes fixed on the flickering light that bled through the cracks in the barn's walls. The fire outside still burned, casting long shadows over the space. But inside the barn, it was colder than Nessa had expected. Clara shifted, the faint rustle of her dress cutting through the quiet. "You know, I used to think, maybe if I just stayed out of his way, kept my head down, he'd leave me be." Clara's voice was soft, almost a whisper, like it wasn't meant for anyone else to hear. Nessa didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just kept watching the smoke rise, curling into the sky like it had a life of its own. She'd seen this before, but it felt different now. The fire, the smoke, it was a warning, something bigger than both of them. I wasn't allowed to make mistakes. Clara's words slid out, heavy with years of repression. Not one. He watched everything, every step, every word. Her hand twitched at her side, fingers clenching, and Nessa could feel the anger, the kind that had been buried too long. Nessa didn't look at her, but she could hear it in Clara's voice. The frustration, the rage. "He made you a prisoner." Clara flinched, then nodded slowly. "I didn't even know I was a prisoner until I tried to leave." Nessa took a breath, her eyes still on the horizon. The fire outside had been burning for hours. There was something about it that reminded her of everything she'd left behind, of everything she'd run from. I know why I came back," Clara muttered, her voice almost lost in the stillness. "I thought maybe he'd see me differently if I just—" She trailed off, her gaze drifting to the ground. "But I'm still his daughter. Always will be." The words hung in the air, and Nessa's jaw tightened. She knew what it felt like to be trapped by something bigger than you, to feel small under the weight of someone else's rules. But Clara's story, it was a different kind of pain. A suffocating kind, one that Nessa hadn't known but understood too well now. The tension between them was thick, heavy, like something was about to snap. Clara let out a sigh, her eyes wandering over the barn. "This place, it feels safer than what I left behind." Nessa's grip on the railing tightened, but she didn't speak. It wasn't a place to feel safe. Nothing in this world was. Clara finally met Nessa's gaze. "Can I stay here? Just for tonight?" There was no pretense in her voice, no softness. Clara wasn't asking for comfort. She wasn't even asking for kindness. She was asking for survival. Nessa felt the weight of the question. She felt the pull of it, deep in her gut. The fire outside crackled, its heat still seeping through the cracks in the barn. Nessa could feel it, but it wasn't enough to burn away what was between them. She had every reason to turn Clara away. She had no room in her life for anyone, not after everything she'd lost. But Clara's eyes, there was something in them, something Nessa recognized, a quiet desperation, a plea. And Nessa, despite everything, despite the years of anger and hurt, couldn't turn her away. She shifted, letting her eyes slide over to Clara. "I don't know why you came here, but you can stay tonight." Her voice was low, heavy, like the words cost her something. Clara's face softened, just for a moment, and Nessa saw something else in her. Not the judge's daughter, not the prisoner, but a woman, tired, just like Nessa. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice barely audible, almost like she wasn't sure she deserved it. Nessa nodded, though she didn't quite know what to say. She didn't need to say anything. The silence between them spoke enough. Clara settled onto the straw-covered floor, pulling her knees to her chest. The barn was cold now, the shadows growing longer as the fire outside continued to rage. Neither of them spoke again. It was too much to say, too much to feel. Nessa lay down beside her, her back to the cold wood of the barn. She closed her eyes, the sounds of the fire still echoing in her mind. There was no comfort in the night, no peace, just the quiet hum of survival. They weren't friends, they weren't anything, not yet. But at that moment, Nessa understood something about Clara, and maybe Clara understood something about her. They were both running from the things that had shaped them, that had broken them. But in this barn, with the fire burning outside and the smoke filling the air, there was no past, only what they could survive. And for now, that was enough. The first light of morning filtered through the cracks in the barn, casting long, thin shadows over the hay-covered floor. Nessa woke slowly, the weight of the night pressing on her chest like a bad dream she couldn't escape. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the soft, dim light. Clara lay beside her, still, her face turned away, the sharp angles of her profile softened in sleep. But the silence between them was different now. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of solitude. It was thick, heavy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Clara's presence felt too close, too foreign in the space that had always been Nessa's. The barn, once a place of quiet escape, suddenly felt too small for the both of them. Nessa shifted, the straw beneath her rustling as she sat up. Clara stirred, but didn't wake. The weight of the night clung to her, a ghost of something both distant and intimate. Nessa stood, her bare feet hitting the cold floor, and walked toward the open door. The morning sun was pale, barely breaking through the horizon. She stared out at the landscape, the world still and waiting, as if it were holding its breath too. Clara's voice broke the silence. "Tell me about your family." The words hit Nessa like a slap. It wasn't a question she'd ever expected from Clara. Not here, not now. But there it was, hanging in the air, too heavy to ignore. Nessa didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the land stretching out before her, the empty fields, the barren trees. "There's nothing to tell." Her voice was low, almost a whisper, like she was afraid the words might break if she spoke too loud. Clara didn't speak for a moment. Nessa could feel her eyes on her back, probing, asking for something Nessa wasn't ready to give. But the silence between them stretched, and Nessa felt the weight of Clara's gaze more than she could bear. "You've been running from them too, haven't you?" Clara's voice was softer now, but there was something raw in it, something that echoed in the quiet. Nessa turned, her face hard. "What's it to you?" Clara's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "Maybe you've been running from yourself." Nessa's heart skipped. She felt something stir inside her, something long buried. It was anger. It was painful. It was a fear she didn't know how to face. But Clara didn't look away. She didn't flinch. And that made Nessa's heart pound harder. The quiet between them grew thicker, heavier, until it felt like the barn itself was closing in. Nessa didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to explain the weight of her past, the ghosts that had been chasing her for years, the family she'd left behind, the woman she used to be. Clara shifted, sitting up, her movements slow but deliberate. "I didn't mean to push," she said, her voice tight, like she was holding something back. I need to understand why you won't let anyone close." Nessa clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. The silence stretched again until the tension between them felt like it was choking the air. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she walked to the door, her boots crunching against the dirt floor as she stepped outside. The morning air was cool on her skin, but the weight of Clara's questions still lingered, like it was a brand she couldn't wash off. Clara followed, stepping out into the open space of the barnyard, her presence close but not pressing. Neither of them spoke as they stood there, side by side, staring at the horizon. The land stretched out before them, empty and waiting, a mirror to the silence that hung between them. Nessa could feel Clara beside her, feel the warmth of her body, and it unsettled her more than anything. She wasn't used to standing next to someone, not like this. The quiet stretched on until Clara finally broke it. "What are you afraid of?" The question was simple, but it felt like a knife. Nessa didn't want to answer it. I didn't want to admit it. She wasn't ready to face it, not yet. But Clara was still there, waiting, and for the first time, Nessa wondered if maybe she wasn't the only one, afraid of what might happen if they started trusting someone else. Nessa swallowed hard, but said nothing. She didn't have the answer, not yet. They stood in silence, the morning stretching on, the world unchanged, and yet everything felt different. The woods were damp and quiet, the earth heavy beneath their feet, as if the ground itself remembered every secret buried in its soil. The trees loomed over them, their twisted branches tangled like the past. Nessa walked a few steps ahead, her boots sinking into the mud with every movement. She could feel the cool morning air pressing against her skin, but it wasn't the chill that made her shiver. It was the weight of the silence between her and Clara. Clara's presence beside her was too close, too steady. Nessa wasn't used to anyone walking beside her. She was used to walking alone. The sharp sound of Clara's footsteps was a constant reminder that she wasn't alone anymore, and it unsettled Nessa in a way she couldn't name. "Sometimes I think the silence is worse than the shouting," Clara said, breaking the quiet that had settled between them. Her voice was soft but firm, the words carrying a weight that Nessa hadn't expected. Nessa didn't answer, but she slowed her pace just enough to let Clara catch up. The tension between them was thick, stretching from one step to the next, and Nessa could feel it in her chest. She wasn't sure what to make of Clara's presence, let alone her words. But Clara wasn't done. My father used to look at me like I wasn't even there. Clara's voice cracked slightly, but she kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, refusing to look at Nessa. Like I didn't matter, like I was a shadow he couldn't even be bothered to see. Nessa kept her gaze straight ahead, not letting her eyes wander. She'd heard stories about the judge, too many stories, and none of them had been kind, but Clara was different. Clara had always been different from the way people spoke of her. She didn't fit the mold of the cold, distant daughter that everyone expected. Nessa wasn't sure why Clara was telling her this now, but something about her words made the ground feel heavier beneath her feet. There was a time I thought it was me, Clara continued, her voice a little softer now. I thought I was the problem, but it wasn't me. It was him. I was just the one he could control, the one he could shut down. Silence. The words sliced through the air between them, and Nessa felt a sting deep in her gut. She wasn't sure what it was, pity, anger, something darker, but she felt it all the same. Nessa had never been one for sympathy, never let herself feel sorry for anyone. But this, Clara's quiet pain, it gnawed at something inside her, something she didn't want to face. You didn't deserve that, Nessa muttered, her voice rough, like it hadn't been used in days. Clara glanced at her then, her eyes searching Nessa's face, looking for something. Nessa didn't look back, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing the emotions that might have been lingering there. She kept her face hard, the mask she had perfected over years of living with a pain she couldn't escape. The trees closed in around them as they walked deeper into the woods, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of wet leaves on the ground. Clara's shoes made a faint sucking noise as she walked, her feet sinking into the earth. Nessa's steps were sure, confident, though the deeper they walked into the woods, the more she felt like she was losing control of the space she had so carefully carved for herself. You ever wonder if it's all too much? Clara asked, her voice quieter now, as if the question was more for herself than for Nessa. Nessa didn't answer at first. She didn't know how to answer. The past had a way of creeping up on you, and no matter how far you tried to run, it always found you. She had learned that the hard way. I've never had the luxury of thinking about it, Nessa finally said, her voice colder than she meant. I didn't get to wonder. I just had to deal with it. Clara's expression faltered, her lips pressing together, but she didn't say anything. The silence stretched again, but this time, it wasn't as suffocating. It was like they were both waiting for something to break, waiting for the moment when the walls they had built up would come crumbling down. I think about it, Clara admitted, her voice small now, as if she were sharing something fragile. I think about what I could have done, differently, what I could have said. Maybe if I'd been enough, he wouldn't have turned out like this. Nessa stopped walking then, her boots digging into the wet earth. She felt Clara's presence behind her, a quiet weight. The silence between them was heavy, the kind that pressed down on your chest until it hurt to breathe. Nessa could feel Clara's eyes on her back, waiting for her response, but Nessa didn't turn around. You can't change the past, Nessa said, her voice low, a warning even to herself, no matter how hard you try. Clara was silent for a moment, and Nessa could feel her stance shift, her posture changing from one of uncertainty to something firmer, stronger. Nessa could feel it, the change in Clara, the shift in the air as the weight of their shared past settled over them. Clara's voice broke through the quiet again, softer but resolute. Maybe not, but I think I can change what happens next. Nessa's heart skipped, the words landing like a blow. She didn't look back, but she felt it. Felt the shift, the silent promise in Clara's voice. There was something there, something she couldn't ignore. Nessa turned, her eyes meeting Clara's for the first time. The tension between them was palpable, thick like the air before a storm. Clara's eyes held something. Vulnerability, yes, but also something stronger, something Nessa couldn't quite place. Then, what's next for you? Nessa asked, her voice softer now. Clara took a step forward, the ground shifting beneath her feet. I'm not running anymore. I'm staying, and if I have to fight, I will. Nessa didn't know how to respond to that. She didn't know what to say. She only nodded, the words sticking in her throat. There was no easy answer, no clear path ahead. But, for the first time, the weight of the past didn't feel quite so heavy. They stood there, side by side, the woods stretching out before them. Neither of them spoke, but the air between them had shifted. They were no longer strangers. They were something more, something that could either break them or bind them together. And for the first time, Nessa wasn't sure which it would be. The river ran low, its waters dark and still, with only the occasional ripple disturbing the quiet surface. Nessa sat on the edge of the barn, watching the water flow, lost in the distant thoughts that had settled like dust in her mind. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the field, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. Clara was a few steps behind, tending to the small camp they'd built by the barn. Her footsteps were soft, almost hesitant, as if she too felt the weight of the silence that hung between them. It was then that the letter appeared. At first it was just a flicker in the current, barely noticeable against the dark water. Nessa didn't move, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. But Clara saw it. She stepped closer to the edge of the river, her gaze following the paper as it drifted closer to the bank. It was old, weathered, the edges frayed from the water's touch. Clara crouched down, reaching out with a trembling hand to pull it from the current. Nessa's stomach clenched at the sight of it. She didn't need to see the writing to know who it was from. Clara turned the letter over, the crease of the envelope soft in her hand. She hesitated for a moment, but then, as if compelled by something deeper, she ripped it open. The sound of paper tearing cut through the stillness, sharp and unwelcome. "What are you doing?" Nessa's voice was low, controlled, but the tremor beneath it was unmistakable. Clara didn't respond at first. She unfolded the letter, her fingers brushing over the yellowed paper. The silence stretched between them, thicker now. "I don't think you're ready for this," Nessa said, her words sharp, but Clara didn't look up. She kept reading, the words pulling her deeper into the past, into something Nessa had tried for so long to bury. Clara's voice broke the quiet. "It's from him, isn't it?" Nessa's heart raced, her breath catching in her chest. She didn't answer. She couldn't. There was nothing to say. The past was right there in front of her, in the words Clara read aloud. Clara's voice faltered as she read the letter, the words shaky at first. "I didn't leave you because I wanted to. I left because it was the only choice I had left. There was no place for us in this world. I couldn't keep running, and I couldn't keep you with me. I thought it was better this way. I thought you'd be better off." Clara's voice caught on the last line, and Nessa felt it, like a punch to the gut. The words weren't just painful. They were a reminder of everything Nessa had tried to forget, everything she'd buried so deep inside herself. Clara paused, looking up at Nessa for the first time since she began reading. "Is this what you've been running from all this time?" The question hung in the air, and Nessa felt the weight of it settle in her chest. She stood slowly, her fists clenched at her sides. The world around her seemed to tilt, as if the past had risen up to swallow her whole. "I told you not to read it," Nessa snapped, her voice rising, sharp as broken glass. Clara didn't flinch. She held the letter in her hands, her gaze never leaving Nessa's face. "You never told me what happened. You never told me why you ran." Nessa's chest tightened. She turned away, pacing in the grass. The tension between them was unbearable, like a storm building on the horizon, waiting to break. She wasn't ready for this. Not for the past to come crashing back into her life. Not for Clara to force her to confront everything she'd tried to outrun. "You think I wanted to stay?" Nessa's voice cracked. She didn't care. "You think I wanted to keep living like that? With him? Watching me, controlling me, telling me where I could go, who I could be?" Clara didn't speak, but Nessa could see the pain in her eyes, the understanding that was finally starting to break through. Nessa turned back, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "He wasn't a man. He was in a cage, and I—" She stopped herself, swallowing hard, the words stuck in her throat. Clara stood slowly, walking toward Nessa, her expression unreadable. She stopped just a few feet away, holding the letter loosely in her hand. "I don't want to hear it," Nessa said, her voice hoarse. "You don't understand. You couldn't." But Clara didn't back down. She stepped forward, placing the letter gently in Nessa's hand. "Maybe I don't understand," she said quietly, "but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The words hit Nessa like a blow. She looked down at the letter in her hand, her fingers trembling. For a moment, she didn't know what to do with it, didn't know what to do with Clara, or with the past that had been shoved in her face. "I've spent my whole life running," Nessa said, her voice low, almost to herself. From him. From everything he made me believe. From the parts of me I didn't want to see. I thought if I kept moving I could leave it all behind. But I can't. It's never gone. It follows me. It's in me. Clara didn't say anything. She just stood there, watching Nessa with quiet patience, like she knew that Nessa needed to say it, needed to speak the words that had been buried for so long. Finally, Nessa let out a long, shaky breath, the anger leaving her as quickly as it had come. I don't know how to stop running. Clara's voice was soft, but firm. You don't have to stop running alone. The words landed like a gentle hand on her shoulder, steadying her, and for the first time in years, Nessa felt the weight of the past loosen its grip. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know what to do with Clara's words or the letter in her hand, but at that moment, she understood something. Survival wasn't just about running. It was about facing the ghosts that chased you and finding someone who could stand beside you when the past came rushing back. And for the first time, Nessa wasn't sure she was running anymore. The air had thickened in the last few hours. The barn, once a quiet refuge, now felt too small, too oppressive. Nessa could feel it, the way the world around them seemed to pause, holding its breath. The fire from the night before had died down to smoldering embers, leaving behind the same quiet tension that had been growing for days. Clara was inside, sitting on the floor near the small stove they had used to keep warm, her eyes fixed on the door. Nessa could feel the weight of it in the way she held herself, straight, rigid, like she was waiting for something she could no longer avoid. It was too quiet in the barn, too still. And then the sound of heavy boots on the dry ground outside. Nessa didn't need to turn to know who it was. The air had shifted, and with it came the presence that loomed over everything they had fought for. The judge, Clara's father. The door creaked open, the harsh light from the outside cutting through the gloom of the barn. The judge stood in the threshold, his figure dark and imposing, blocking the sunlight as though he were the very shadow of control itself. His face was set in that familiar grimace, eyes narrowed, calculating. He looked at Clara with disdain, like she was a disappointment he couldn't bring himself to erase. "Clara," he said, his voice low, but loud enough to make the very ground beneath them tremble. "It's time to come home." Clara didn't move. She didn't look away. But Nessa could see the tremble in her hands, the way her breath hitched ever so slightly. "I'm not going back." Clara's voice was soft, but unwavering. There was a strength in her now that hadn't been there before, a quiet defiance that seemed to surprise even her father. The judge took a step forward, his boots scraping against the barn's worn floor. "You think you have a choice in this?" He sneered, his eyes cutting into Clara's. "You've always been a burden. You've never understood your place." Clara's jaw tightened, but she stood her ground. "I know my place, better than you ever did." Nessa watched in silence, her fists clenched at her sides. She could feel the blood boiling beneath her skin, the injustice of it, the weight of what Clara was facing. She had been running, hiding from this moment for so long, but Clara wasn't backing down. She wasn't shrinking in the face of her father's presence. The judge's eyes shifted to Nessa, narrowing with cold recognition. "And you," he spat, his voice laced with contempt. "You've always been trouble. I should have known you'd be involved in this mess. You've never learned how to stay out of things that don't concern you." Nessa stepped forward, her body rigid, her wildness rising. "You don't get to say what concerns me," she snapped, her voice sharp and cutting. "You don't get to control this anymore." The judge's face twisted with anger, his eyes flashing with a fury that seemed to burn through the air between them. "You think you can challenge me?" He took another step, his shadow lengthening across the barn floor. "I don't care what kind of fool you've made yourself out to be, but you will not stand in my way." Clara stepped between them, her voice trembling, but her resolve clear. "You've already ruined everything, Father. I'm not going back to that house. I'm not going back to the life you built for me. I'm done." The judge stopped, his expression hardening into something colder. "You will never be free of me. Do you hear me, Clara? You will never escape." Nessa felt the ground beneath her feet tremble, the weight of the judge's words pressing down on them. But Clara didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She was standing her ground, and for the first time, Nessa felt something shift in her too. She had never been afraid of him, not in the same way Clara had. But the power he had once held over Clara was slipping away, and for the first time, Nessa could see it. She could see Clara taking her own power back. And that was when Nessa felt it, her wildness, the force of her anger, the sharpness of her words, her need to protect. She couldn't stand by and watch anymore. She stepped forward, her voice rising. "You don't get to keep her in chains, old man. Not anymore. She's her own person. And you're not going to drag her back to that hell you created." The judge's eyes flicked to Nessa, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something. Disbelief, perhaps, or rage. "You think you can stop me? You, who have nothing, who have been nothing." Nessa didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her hands balled into fists. "I don't need anything but this. I'm done watching people like you destroy everything they touch." The judge looked at both of them then, his face tightening, lips curled in disdain. "You'll both regret this. Mark my words. You'll regret defying me." But as he turned and stormed toward the door, Nessa felt a strange sense of power shift between them. The weight of his presence, the shadow of his control, had never seemed so fragile. Clara was still standing there, her feet firmly planted, eyes still locked on the judge's retreating figure. And Nessa. Nessa wasn't walking away this time. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The barn was still, silent. The weight of the confrontation hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Then Clara, her voice quieter than before, but still strong, spoke. "You don't have to stay, you know." Nessa turned to look at her, her expression unreadable, but in the quiet that followed, something shifted between them. "I'm not leaving you," Nessa said, her voice low but firm. "Not now, not ever." Clara's gaze softened, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I didn't think you would." Nessa felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The judge's shadow had left, but the real power, the power that had always belonged to Clara, was just beginning to take shape. And for the first time, Nessa didn't feel like she was standing in the shadow of anything. Not anymore. The river stretched before them, its waters dark and restless, churning against the rocks that lined its banks. Nessa stood at the water's edge, her boots sinking into the wet earth, staring out at the currents, lost in the quiet rush of the water. The wind was lighter here, the air cooler. The river felt like a different world, a place where the past could be swallowed by the tide, where things didn't have to follow you anymore. Clara stood beside her, a few paces back, her eyes fixed on the water. But she was aware of Nessa, as always. The silence between them was comfortable now, but it didn't feel like an absence. It felt like something was waiting to be said, something that both of them knew but hadn't yet found the words for. "I don't know why I brought you here," Nessa said finally, her voice low, barely above a whisper. "It's just something about this place. It's the only thing that feels like it's mine. I've never really had anywhere that felt like home." Clara shifted, stepping closer to her. The soft rustle of her shoes against the wet grass was the only sound for a moment. "I know what you mean," she replied quietly, her voice careful, like she was testing the waters between them. "I've spent my whole life looking for a place that wasn't my father's, but it always felt like wherever I went, I was just walking through someone else's world." Nessa nodded, her gaze still fixed on the river. She could feel the weight of Clara's words settling between them, like something too heavy to ignore. There was a truth in what Clara said, a truth that mirrored her own. The silence stretched again, thick with everything unsaid. Nessa could feel Clara's presence beside her, like a quiet pressure against her skin. It wasn't uncomfortable, not anymore, but it was unfamiliar, and Nessa didn't know how to make it feel natural. "What was it like?" Clara asked, her voice softer now, almost tentative. "Growing up, before everything changed." Nessa's chest tightened at the question. She hadn't spoken of her past in years, not to anyone. There were parts of it she'd buried so deep she could almost pretend it had never happened. But Clara's question cut through the layers of silence she'd wrapped around herself. Nessa took a breath, steadying herself. "It was dark. Not like the way you think. Not the way people like to say it was, like it was a sad story or a bad dream. It was just there. Like the world was watching me all the time, and no matter how hard I tried, I could never hide from it." Clara didn't say anything, but Nessa could feel her eyes on her, waiting. Nessa swallowed hard, the memory of it clawing at her throat. My mother left when I was young. She was always distant, always somewhere else. My father wasn't much better. He was there, but he wasn't. Clara stepped closer, the soft sound of her breathing in the quiet air. What do you mean? Nessa hesitated, looking out at the water again, as though the river might give her the words she needed. I mean, he wasn't really there, not in the way people are supposed to be. He had his own demons, his own ghosts, and I was just a part of the things he couldn't handle. She paused, the weight of the confession sinking in. I learned to stay out of his way, stay quiet, stay invisible. Clara was silent for a long time, and Nessa felt her heart race in the stillness. She wasn't used to sharing these pieces of herself. She wasn't used to someone else seeing her this way. I know what that feels like, Clara finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I spent years thinking that if I just stayed quiet, stayed small, he'd notice me, that he'd love me if I was good enough. But I was never enough. I was never anything but a reflection of what he wanted me to be. I was just his daughter, and that was all he ever saw me as. Nessa turned to look at Clara then, really look at her for the first time. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that matched her own, a shared pain that neither of them had ever asked for. For the first time, Nessa saw Clara not as the judge's daughter, but as a woman, a person who had been shaped by the same things that had shaped her. You're not him, Nessa said, her voice firm, but the words felt raw. You're not your father, Clara, and you never were. Clara's lips trembled, and for a moment, Nessa thought she might break, might crumble under the weight of it. But Clara held herself steady, her shoulders squared, her eyes never leaving Nessa's. I know, Clara whispered. I know that now, but it doesn't change what he did to me, what I let him do to me. The words hung between them, and Nessa could feel the tension rising, that quiet storm building beneath the surface. She wanted to reach out, wanted to pull Clara closer, but she didn't know if she could bear it, if she could let herself open up like that. Instead, Clara took a small step forward, her hand brushing lightly against Nessa's. It was a subtle gesture, but it was enough. It was everything. Nessa didn't pull away. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she let her hand fall to Clara's, the contact simple but grounding. I'm here, Clara said softly, her voice thick with the promise of something Nessa couldn't yet name. And I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. The words hung in the air, lingering like the mist rising from the river, swirling around them, settling in their lungs. For the first time, Nessa didn't feel like she was running. For the first time, the past didn't feel so heavy. The river rushed by, its constant flow a reminder of time, of change. But, for the first time, Nessa felt like she wasn't alone. And that was enough. The tension was still there, hovering beneath the surface. But something had shifted. Something had broken through. And whatever came next, Nessa knew she wouldn't be facing it alone. The wind picked up as the fire crept closer, its heat riding on the air, licking at the edges of the land like a promise of destruction. Nessa stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the orange glow of the flames flickered in the distance. The air smelled of smoke and ash, the scent of things burning, things being destroyed. It was the same scent that had followed her entire life. The smell of a world, too broken to save, too far gone to rebuild. Clara stood beside her presence quieter now, softer than usual, as if the weight of the fire had made her small, made her unsure. The silence between them stretched out like an open wound, raw and painful. I need to go, Nessa said, her voice barely a whisper, but loud enough to break the quiet between them. She didn't turn to look at Clara, couldn't, not now. It's better this way. Clara didn't respond at first. Nessa could feel her eyes on her back, burning with something that was neither anger nor fear. But when Clara finally spoke, her voice was strained, like she was holding something back, something more than just words. You don't have to go, Clara said softly, her voice so quiet Nessa almost missed it over the crackling of the fire. Not this time. We can live together. We can make it work. Nessa's throat tightened, the weight of Clara's words pressing on her chest like a heavy stone. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to feel the pull of Clara's voice, the desperate hope in her words. But it was there, thick in the air between them, suffocating. No, Nessa said, shaking her head as if to clear away the thoughts that threatened to consume her. You don't understand. If I stay with you, everything that's chasing me, everything that's followed me, it'll follow you too. And I can't do that to you. Clara's breath caught, and for a moment, there was nothing but the crackling of the fire and the rush of wind between them. Nessa could feel Clara's presence next to her, feel the weight of her hand twitching at her side, wanting to reach out, wanting to stop her from running. "You're wrong," Clara said, her voice breaking through Nessa's defenses. "I don't care what's chasing you. I don't care what you've run from. I'm not afraid of you, Nessa. I'm not afraid of us." Her voice trembled, but there was strength in it, the kind of strength Nessa had never allowed herself to believe in. The words hit Nessa like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She felt the rawness of Clara's voice, the truth in it, and it made her want to fall apart, to crumble beneath the weight of it. Clara wasn't afraid of her. She wasn't afraid of the things that haunted Nessa's past, and that terrified Nessa more than the fire itself. "Clara, you don't know what you're asking," Nessa said, her voice thick with emotion, her heart pounding in her chest. She stepped away, putting distance between them, but Clara followed her, her steps quick, desperate. "I don't care," Clara said, her hand reaching out to grasp Nessa's arm, pulling her back. The touch was gentle, but firm, like a lifeline Nessa didn't want to hold on to. "I want to stay with you. I don't want to lose you, Nessa. Not like this." Nessa felt the heat of Clara's hand, the warmth of it burning through her, clothes through her skin, straight to her heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the swell of emotion that threatened to overtake her. She wanted to stay, wanted to believe that they could survive together. But she knew better. She had seen this before, had watched people like Clara burn to ash in the wake of the things she couldn't outrun. "I can't," Nessa said, her voice strained, barely a whisper. "I've spent my whole life running, Clara, and I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to stay and not destroy everything I touch." Clara's grip tightened on her arm, her fingers digging into Nessa's skin as if trying to anchor her to the earth, to hold her here with her. "You're not destroying anything. You're not alone anymore, and you don't have to run anymore. Not from me, not from yourself." Nessa jerked her arm away, stepping back, her chest heaving with the effort it took to fight the pull of Clara's words. "You don't get it," she said, her voice shaking with the weight of everything she was holding inside. "If I stay with you, it's not just me that gets hurt. The judge, he's coming for both of us, and he won't stop until he's ruined everything. You're not ready for that. You're not ready to face him, and neither am I." Clara's face hardened, but there was no fear in her eyes, just something fierce, something unyielding. "I've already faced him. I've already lost everything. What's left for him to take?" Her voice shook, but there was no doubt in it. "I'm not afraid of him anymore, Nessa, and I'm not afraid of what comes next either." Nessa looked at her, at the woman who had stood by her side through everything, who had refused to back down even when it would have been easier to run. The weight of Clara's words settled on Nessa's chest, and for a brief moment, she let herself believe it. She let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could face this together. But the sound of the fire, the crackle of it as it crept closer, pulled Nessa back to reality. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of smoke and ash. The fire was coming. It was no longer something in the distance. It was at their doorstep, licking at their heels, ready to swallow them whole. "We don't have a choice," Nessa said, her voice breaking, her shoulders sagging under the weight of it. "We never had a choice." Clara didn't let go. She stood her ground, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Then we make one." And for the first time, Nessa didn't walk away. She didn't turn her back. Instead, she let herself stand there, beside Clara, feeling the pull of something she'd never allowed herself to feel before. It wasn't safety or certainty. It was something else, something stronger than the past, stronger than the fire, something that might just save them both. The fire was closer now, its glow painting the sky in shades of red and all orange. It was a warning, a signal of what was coming. The wind carried with it the scent of burning, the faint crackle of branches breaking under the heat. Nessa could feel it, deep in her bones. The weight of it, the inevitability of what was coming for them. Clara stood at the edge of the clearing, her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. She was silent, but the tension in her body was evident. Nessa had never seen her so still, so calm. It was as if the fire in the distance was a part of her now, something she couldn't escape. It was the same quiet strength that had brought her this far, but now it felt like the last step, the moment where everything would change. Nessa couldn't stand still. She paced in the dirt, her boots grinding into the earth, the weight of her thoughts too much to hold in. Her heart raced as she watched Clara, unsure of what she was seeing, what she was feeling. The decision was made, and Nessa could see it in Clara's posture, the way she held herself now. There was no turning back for either of them. "You don't have to do this," Nessa said, her voice breaking the silence between them. She stopped pacing, turning to face Clara, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. "You don't have to stay here. We could leave. We could—" Clara cut her off with a look, her expression steady, calm, but there was something hard behind it. "I'm not running anymore, Nessa. Not from him, not from this. I won't live my life in fear anymore." The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of years of silence, of secrets, of things they had both buried deep inside. Clara wasn't just talking about her father, she was talking about everything, the fire that had burned everything she had once known, the choices she'd made to survive. She was talking about the past that had shaped her into someone who could stand here now, unmoving in the face of what was to come. "I'm not running either," Nessa replied, her voice quieter now, more uncertain. She had always run, always kept moving, never stopping to face the consequences of her choices. But now, with Clara standing there, unshaken, Nessa felt something shift inside her, a quiet surrender, a pull towards something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Clara's eyes softened for a moment, the flicker of something that looked like understanding passing between them. "Then we're both here, and we'll face it together." Nessa didn't know if she believed it, didn't know if she could let herself believe it. She had spent her entire life running from the things that haunted her, her past, the darkness inside her, the wildness she had clung to like a shield. What would happen if she stayed? What would happen if she allowed herself to be part of something else? Something more than the person she had always been? The fire crackled in the distance, louder now, the wind carrying the sound of it to them. It was getting closer. Nessa stepped forward, her boots crunching in the dirt, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. There was a part of her that was still afraid to stay, still afraid of the things that might break if she did. But Clara's calm resolve kept her tethered. "I don't know if I can do this," Nessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stopped just a few feet from Clara, her chest tight with the weight of her own fear. "I've always been alone. I've always done things my way. What if I can't? What if I lose who I am?" Clara turned to face her, her eyes steady, unwavering. There was no judgment there, no fear, just a quiet understanding. "Maybe you'll find something new," she said softly. "Maybe you'll find something that isn't tied to what you've always run from. You don't have to lose who you are, Nessa. You just have to stop running." The words settled between them, heavier than the weight of the fire in the distance. Clara was right, in some way. Nessa wasn't running from Clara. She was running from herself, from the person she had become, from the things she had carried with her for so long. But maybe it was time to stop. "I don't know if I can," Nessa said again, the doubt in her voice cutting through the calm between them. Clara reached out, her hand finding Nessa's in the stillness. The touch was simple, but it grounded Nessa in a way she hadn't expected. There was nothing gentle about it, but it was steady, firm, like Clara was offering her something, her strength, her willingness to stay, to fight, to be here with her. "We can face it together," Clara said again, her voice quiet but sure. "We don't have to fight alone." Nessa looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, in a way that wasn't colored by fear or doubt. Clara wasn't asking her to change. She was asking her to stay, to choose something other than running, other than hiding from the things that had defined her. And for the first time, Nessa wasn't sure she wanted to run anymore. The fire crackled again, its roar louder now, but it didn't feel as threatening. It felt inevitable, like something that had always been coming, something that had been set in motion long ago. But now, standing there beside Clara, Nessa didn't feel so afraid of it. Together, they could face it. Together, they could walk through the flames. Nessa exhaled, letting the tension in her body ease, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the stirrings of something more than fear. It was acceptance. It was surrender. It was a choice. "All right," Nessa said, her voice steady now. "I'm with you." Clara gave a small nod, her fingers tightening briefly around Nessa's hand. The fire burned in the distance, but the world felt different now. It felt like the beginning of something that neither of them could outrun, but something they could walk through together. And for the first time, Nessa believed it. The fire was a distant glow now, a fading ember on the horizon, but its heat still clung to the air. The land felt scorched, as though the earth itself had been burned by everything that had passed. The barn was quiet again, its walls heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. The wind had died down, leaving behind the stillness of a world that was holding its breath. Nessa and Clara sat side by side on the porch, their backs to the barn. The light of the dying fire was reflected in their eyes, the last remnants of a world that had come undone. The air was cool now, the night creeping in, but there was no chill between them, no distance. The sound of the fire's crackling was distant, and with it, the world outside their little corner of the earth had fallen into silence. It was the kind of quiet that felt like something was ending, like the world was waiting for them to decide what came next. "I thought I'd be more afraid," Clara said quietly, her voice low and steady, but tinged with something else, something that wasn't fear, but something deeper. "But I'm not. Not anymore." She looked out at the darkening sky, the faint flicker of the fire still visible in the distance. "I've been running for so long, Nessa. Running from my father, from my life, from everything that kept me small." She turned to face Nessa, her eyes steady. "But I'm not running anymore." Nessa felt her chest tighten, a knot forming there that wasn't born of fear, but of something else, something softer, something that she didn't know how to place. She wasn't used to hearing Clara speak like this. She wasn't used to seeing her so sure, so at peace with what was coming. "You're not running from him then?" Nessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question lingered between them, fragile and uncertain. Clara's gaze didn't waver. "Number not anymore." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I used to think I needed to get away from everything he made me believe I was. But I've spent so much time thinking about him, about what he did to me, that I forgot who I was before that, who I am without him." Nessa let her words sink in, the weight of them pressing against her. Clara had always been the judge's daughter, always the reflection of a man who had cast a long, cold shadow over her life. But now, Clara was something else, something Nessa hadn't fully understood until this moment. "What are you going to do?" Nessa asked, the question raw, the weight of it filling the space between them. She wasn't just asking about the judge or the fire. She was asking about the future, about what Clara was going to choose. Clara looked at her for a long moment, her eyes searching Nessa's face, as if trying to find something she hadn't known she was looking for. "I'm going to fight," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "I'm going to stay and fight for the life I've never had. I'm going to take what's mine." Nessa felt something shift in her chest at the words. It wasn't just the fire she was fighting, it was the life she had been denied, the years spent in someone else's shadow. Clara wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for something bigger than that, something that Nessa had never allowed herself to understand until now. "And what about me?" Nessa asked, her voice quiet but edged with something deep and uncertain. "What do I do?" Clara's gaze softened. "You fight too," she said. "You fight for the things you've been running from. You fight for yourself, for the life you deserve." Nessa swallowed hard, the weight of Clara's words sinking into her like stones in water. She had spent her life running, always afraid of what would happen if she stopped, afraid of losing herself. But Clara was right. The time for running was over, and the only way out of this, out of everything they had both been through, was through it. The sound of the fire, now nothing but a distant crackle, seemed to fade as Clara reached out, her hand brushing against Nessa's. It was a small gesture, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that they weren't alone in this, that whatever came next, they would face it together. "I've never really had anything to stay for," Nessa said quietly, her voice rough, the words raw on her tongue. "I've always kept moving, but now, I don't know. Maybe I have something worth staying for." Clara's hand tightened around hers, and in that simple touch, something passed between them, something that didn't need to be said. It was a promise, unspoken but understood. They had both been shaped by their pasts, shaped by the things they had survived, but they didn't have to be those things anymore. Clara looked out at the distant fire, her expression unreadable. "I'm not leaving," she said softly. "Not now, Not when there's still a chance to take back what was stolen from us. Nessa nodded, the weight of her past and her future settling into the space between them. For the first time, she felt like she was no longer running from anything. The fire, the chaos, the judge, all of it felt far away, even though it was so close. And in this quiet moment, on the porch of the barn, with the weight of the world heavy on their shoulders, Clara and Nessa made their decision. They would stay, they would fight, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The fire in the distance burned on, but for the first time, Nessa didn't feel like it was coming for her. For the first time, she felt like the fire was behind her. The ground beneath them was still. The only sound was the wind sweeping through the trees, carrying with it the acrid scent of smoke from the fire still licking the edges of the land. Nessa stood just outside the barn, her fists clenched at her sides, every muscle in her body tight with the tension of what was to come. The air. It was thick with the weight of everything that had been building, everything that had led them here. Clara stood beside her, eyes fixed on the road that led up to the estate. The moment was here. The judge and his men were coming. Nessa could feel it, their presence, their power, coming to crush whatever was left of them. But something in Clara had shifted, something had changed. The quiet resolve that had taken root in her bones was now a part of her, as much as the blood in her veins. They were no longer the women they had been when this started. The fire had burned away the parts of them that had been too afraid to fight back, and now there was nothing left but the need to face what came next. The sound of hooves on the dirt road reached them, and Nessa's chest tightened. The judge was here. Clara turned to her, her face calm, but there was a fire in her eyes, something fierce and untamable. She reached out, her hand brushing Nessa's, the contact soft but steady like a promise. Nessa squeezed her hand, her throat tight. This was it. The judge and his men came into view, riding hard, their horses kicking up dust as they approached. They stopped just a few feet from the barn, their eyes hard, their faces grim. The judge's gaze locked onto Clara, his mouth tightening into a thin line as he slid off his horse. Clara stood her ground, not a hint of fear in her posture, her eyes locked onto his. The air between them crackled with something far worse than the tension of a physical fight. This was a battle of wills, of years of control and manipulation coming to a head. "You think you can just leave?" The judge's voice cut through the silence, low and dangerous. He was used to being obeyed, used to getting what he wanted, and Clara's defiance was something he hadn't prepared for. "I'm not your daughter anymore," Clara said, her voice steady, but there was a tremor beneath the surface, something raw, something human. "I'm not your prisoner." The judge's eyes narrowed, his gaze flickering to Nessa before snapping back to Clara. "You're nothing without me. You're nothing without what I gave you. You're nothing without my name." Clara didn't flinch. She stepped forward, closing the space between them, her chest rising and falling with every breath, but her voice was strong. "I don't need your name. I don't need anything from you anymore." The judge's lip curled, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind between them. Then he spoke again, quieter this time, but no less menacing. "You think you can run from me? You think I'll let you take what's mine? You're just a girl who's out of her depth, and you'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." Clara's eyes didn't waver. She was facing him now as a woman, not a child, not the daughter he had controlled. "If you think you can break me now, you're wrong. I'm not afraid of you anymore." Nessa watched, her heart in, her throat, as the judge took a step toward Clara, his presence looming over her. This wasn't just about power, it was about control, about tearing down the last vestige of resistance. He wanted to crush them both. But Clara didn't step back. She didn't give an inch. She was standing in the place of everything she had been too afraid to confront for years. She was facing her father, but she wasn't the girl he had left broken. She was the woman who had chosen to fight, to stand up for herself. And for the first time, Nessa saw her not as the judge's daughter, but as a force in her own right. The judge's face twisted with fury, but it was Clara's calmness that rattled him. It was the fact that she wasn't afraid. And Nessa could feel that shift, that crack in the judge's control. He wasn't just losing his grip on Clara, he was losing his grip on everything he had thought he could control. "This is where you die," the judge said, his voice low and menacing. His men, standing behind him, shifted uncomfortably, but they didn't move. They were just waiting for the signal, just waiting for their leader's command. But Clara didn't flinch. She didn't back down. "Then I'll die on my own terms. I'll die with my head held high." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Nessa had never seen Clara like this, and for the first time, she understood the weight of what they were both facing. This wasn't just about survival. This wasn't just about running or hiding or escaping. This was a moment of truth, a moment where everything Clara had been, everything she had feared, had led to this. Nessa stepped forward, her voice steady but sharp as a blade. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me first." The judge's eyes flicked to her, his gaze cold, calculating. "You think you can stop me?" Nessa met his eyes, her heart pounding, but her voice unwavering. "You've already lost. You just don't know it yet." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The judge's men shifted again, but he didn't make a move. The silence was unbearable, the weight of their words hanging in the air between them. The showdown wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The power was shifting, slowly but surely, and both Clara and Nessa knew it. Clara's hand found Nessa's again, her grip tight but full of something unspoken. The judge stood before them, a force they couldn't outrun, but they didn't need to outrun him anymore. They didn't need to hide. "We're not afraid," Clara said, her voice steady, her resolve firm. "And we're not backing down." The judge said nothing, his eyes flickering with a mix of anger and disbelief. He had underestimated them both, and now he was faced with something he couldn't control. The fire in the distance burned on, but in that moment, Clara and Nessa stood together, no longer running. They had made their stand, and whatever came, next they would face it side by side.